What's up? What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. I am very excited for today's show because one of my dear friends is back on the show, and I just did Your Welcome a few days ago, but we talked about comedy and other things like that, and so I have not actually sat down and picked the brain of Michael Malice about this year's election. We're under a week until election day, so I figured this was the perfect time. Of course, everybody listening already knows who Michael Malice is, but if you don't, just know you're alone. You're the only one. You're kind of a loser.
But you're basically you're the Tom Woods of the audience.
You're the Tom Woods of this audience. Oh, man. I also, by the way, just recorded a new Tom Woods show episode yesterday. That should be out soon. Also, us talking about the election. Does that count
as your community service?
I was 5 years. I got to do it. I got to do it 4 times a year for 5 years, and then it's my record is expunged, so I'm fine. Of course, Michael is a very successful author. He's written books on North Korea, on the new right wing in America, on the history of communism. Dear Reader, The New Right, and The White Pill, all three really fantastic. And particularly, I think The New Right is going to be very relevant to the conversation we have today. And The White Pill, too, to some degree. Not so much on the Korea stuff. Maybe we'll fit in some Korea stuff. But anyway, he's also host of Your Welcome, his phenomenal podcast. Michael Malice, how are you, sir?
I'm actually beyond giddy, and I'll tell you why. And this is a little bit of sidebar, but I actually shed a tear last night of joy because there was this band. I do you like music? Is there some music that means a lot to you the same way that it means to me? Like some bands that are like, this band is like, holy shit, it's like something sacred almost.
Sure.
Yeah. So there was this band that no one had heard of called Insta, right? The album came out in 2002. I absolutely love their album. They're so obscure that I wore their t-shirt on Rogan thinking people would be like, oh, cool. Not one person, not one.
No one got it.
Not one. I'm not even kidding. Not one comment was like, oh, Insta, that band. They came out of an earlier band called Allison's Halo, who were this 90s dream pop band, which is even genre most people haven't heard of. Point being, they came up on my iPod randomly, and I Googled them, and they're playing here Saturday. Like this 90s Arizona dream pop band is just playing at this barbecue place here on Saturday. And this music has meant so much to me over the years that I'm absolutely fucking giddy. And I'm bringing Winston Marshall from formerly of Mumford & Sons, and no one knows who these people are. And I'm bringing the CDs for them to sign, and I have the shirt, and they're going to be really freaked out. But
how big is the venue that they're playing?
It's literally going to be it's a barbecue joint. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
It's not big.
That's just.
But I'm so happy.
Well, there's something that just is amazing to me about a band who's still doing it.
But they weren't together for they haven't performed 20 years. I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, they're performing at a barbecue joint. I'm not saying they've never taken any vacation days. I'm just saying that there's something amazing about all these years later when there's no more dream. There's no more maybe this turns into arenas somehow.
Yes,
it's not impressive. A 20-year-old playing in a barbecue joint isn't impressive because he's maybe one day I'll be, playing big venues. But there's something about at the end. I feel this way in comedy too, where sometimes you'll see a comic who's in their 60s and it just never happened for them. And they're still getting up on the spot. And there's just something about that. You're like, oh, it's just this really in a weird way. And I'm not saying a lot of times those are sad stories, but it really proves that you're doing it for the love of the game on some level because there's no upside.
That happened here in a dark way in Austin. I went to a club. I'm not going to say the name. And there was a woman there, and it was one of those. The hook of this night was it's like a gong show. So the hosts have a gong, and then people in the audience have a lighter. And if all 3 people with the lighter hold it up, they get kicked off the stage. And I was using that lighter very comedically. I was in front and center. And some of the comics were just really genuinely I'm confused why you're on stage bad. You're not even the funny one of your friends. I'm sure you've seen them. I'm sure everyone here has seen those type of comics. And I was messing with this one lady. It was a very nice lady. And I was talking to her after, and she's early 40s. And she moved here from New York to make it happen in comedy. But it was the most generic, I'm neurotic, I can't get laid stuff. and I'm talking to her, and I'm being very friendly, but it's just like, what are you doing that's special? Like this band that no one's heard of, Allison's Halo, they did something very like niche, like it was a unique kind of music, but it's like you're just doing like C-level Chelsea Handler stuff. Like, what is your path, and why does this matter to you? Why do you want to be a dime store Chelsea Handler?
Yeah. Why does it matter to you? Because if you don't know the answer to that question, why would it matter to me?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like what you got to have something that separates you. Yeah. Well, speaking of people who have something that separates them, this Donald Trump fella seems to be, that's a transition right back into this. What are I'm very interested to kind of get your thoughts here. And of course, you, like me, are an anarchist who believes in a stateless society. You've also, where we're also pretty much seem to see eye to eye in general. You've been very, I wouldn't say you're a critic of voting, but a skeptic of voting.
Sure. Yeah, that's better.
You wrote a piece in, what was it, in The Observer?
The Guardian.
It was in The Guardian. It was in, that's right. A piece about like kind of why you don't vote. Does this, so anyway, you just have a kind of a different lens that you analyze these things through than your average, you know, person who's talking in this space. And I'm curious because I haven't really picked your brain about it. You could go anywhere you want with this, but what do you think about this? You know, we're coming down to the last week. This election cycle in many ways has been very different than anything we've ever lived through. It does, to some degree, feels like a logical continuation of where we've been going, but assassination attempts, a candidate being forced to drop out a couple months before the election, a candidate who didn't win a primary and doesn't seem to have a mind at all, being the Democratic nominee. What are you know, the mischievous Michael Malice, what are you thinking as you watch all of this?
By the way, let's also point out that the president, for the first time in history, has been forced to not run again, and the corporate press has just stopped, never even pretended to ask why. It's never like everyone kind of knows or can guess, but no one's like, okay, what were the steps that led you to this decision, Mr. President? Like what like, talk to us. This is history. No curiosity at all. It's just like, okay, like it's, even if you can understand why, okay, I'm a senile old freak. Okay, one day you're like, God's going to have to tear me off this Oval Office himself. The next day is like, yeah, I'm just going to tweet out that I'm not running again. What changed? No curiosity at all. So, I mean, when people talk about truth to power and that the media is interested in finding and informing the voters and the populace, zero evidence. It's all the evidence to the contrary. That's number one. Number two is something that's personal to me and I know to you. I was the guy who got Vivek to look into Ross Ulbricht. And Vivek was the one who got Trump to be like, okay, I'm publicly declare this at the Libertarian Convention, the day one I'm freeing Ross. So I have a vested interest because you and I both know when it comes to politics, take whatever wins you can get. So if I have a little, like with North Korea, we can shoehorn it in. If I had a little bit to do with getting people to stop thinking about it as a big punchline and be like, wait a minute, this is a nightmare, which has now happened. Like no one looks at that as like, look at these wacky people. They're like, look at these people forced to do wacky things. Yeah. If Ross gets out of jail, as far as day one things, I'll take it. I'm very I don't know about concerned, but I remember vividly, and I'm sure you do, and most people watching this as well, 2022, and all the polls were like, it was Republican red wave. All the swing states were going Republican. You know, people were just saying all these weird, like Rhode Island's going to elect a Republican congressman, so on and so forth. And I was at election night on the Blaze, as were you as well. You phoned in. And that's not what ended up happening. And then I know the mousetraps going off people's heads. Yeah, when Trump wasn't on the ballot. Well, he kind of was. Some of those were proxy candidates, you know, like Trump candidates. And they all, I think, 201, where there were swing states lost. So that could be what we're seeing again. I believe that Kamala Harris has been sat down and told the results. And I don't know if that means, all right, we got this in the bag, who cares? Or like, it's a wrap. I think at this point they have enough information, because these people are really smart behind the scenes, not in front of the camera, but behind them, that they've got enough data to crunch, you know, that they could be like, all right, we know how this is going to go. And I don't think it's going to be close. And I don't know what's going to end up happening. I'm just very concerned, as I'm certain you are, about Tim Walz, because of all of them, he to me is by far the most ominous and terrifying figure.
Oh, why do you think that?
Because I think during COVID, he set up snitch line to turn in your neighbors. He had the cops shooting people with was it foam bullets or rubber bullets, whatever. The point is, when you have this kind of Soviet having everyone be watching everybody else, low trust society, that is much scarier to me than someone who is basically a mindless corporate hack and a function of the machine, which is what we have now, which I don't love. But if, again, people are like, don't understand choices. Like, I'd rather have the flu than cancer. I don't want to have the flu. I'd rather have her, who is just an idiot, who's just doing the puppets, being a puppet, than someone who's an ideologue who has really malevolent, dark-sided ideas.
Yeah, I will say there is also just, and this is fairly, I mean, it might sound kind of superficial, but there is just something about Walz that just creeps me out.
Yeah.
And I can't exactly put my finger on it, but he's a very strange guy. And there's just something about like the way he moves, the way he talks, the way he like, he shook his wife's hand.
Yeah.
On video one, did you see that?
Yes.
Which like I can't really make a completely logical argument for why that's the weirdest thing in the world, but it's just one thing, like human beings, the idea of shaking my wife's hand, like it's just never, I don't know. It's just so bizarre and strange. Yeah. And like, there's something like where you're like, oh, I don't get a read on you. And that kind of freaks me out in a way. And
it's also when you're a politician, you and I both know this also, when we're on shows, you act a certain way. So you're going to be even more on when you're in front of a camera. So like, this is your choice. This isn't like you got caught back. Like he's back at home. He comes home, he shakes her hand. And it's like hidden camera. Like, oh, that's weird. This is in front of the cameras.
Yes. Yeah. What you'd think you would have scripted out things like when Al Gore like real aggressively kissed his wife because he was trying to like combat the image of Bill Clinton like and having a sexless marriage or something. So like he was trying to let the whole world know like I fucked my wife. That's the moment, which was bizarre in its own way. But I don't know. It's kind of even more bizarre to let the world know I shake my wife's hand.
Yeah.
I greet her like a business partner. Or so, I don't know why. It's so weird to me. Do you obviously, you have been known for being a bit of a troll and having some hostility toward the corporate media.
Yeah.
Donald Trump obviously is both of those things, also shares those qualities. Sure. Do you feel like, is there, I mean, just watching kind of over the last few days of coverage to me have been really wild to see. I mean, I was talking about this on the last show where it's like, it seems like Donald Trump is setting up his closing pitch, and he's like, okay, I'm going to do Rogan. I'm going to do The Garden. I'm going to kind of do this big show, which is what Trump is really great at doing. Yeah. And the corporate media and the Democrats are like, all right, here's our final act. We're going to call him a Nazi. We're pulling the ace out of the hole, and that's just it. And it's kind of, anyway, I don't know. What do you think?
Do you know what's even funnier? Do you know what's even funnier, Dave? They've been calling him Hitler for months, and the big reveal is that Hitler was a Nazi.
Right, yeah.
Like Scooby-Doo. Wait a minute, I was for Hitler until I learned he was a Nazi. I didn't know.
It really is. So, I mean, look, they both had, the American Nazi Party had an event at Madison Square Garden.
By the way, I got to tell you this, you and I are both Jewish. It's very rare that I find things offensive. I find it really offensive to divorce Nazism from anti-Semitism. This was and I don't use that term anti-Semitism like ever. It is central to like Hitler's ideology, right? Trump's daughter converted. Yeah. So if you're going to call someone a Nazi, he loves Ivanka. That's pretty clear. If you lose your kid to, maybe that's going to encourage you to be a Nazi. Depending on your relationship with her, but you're really crossing a line there. And the shamelessness of it is what makes it really despicable. And Doug Emhoff, hit him with your best shot, Doug. When I don't know if you saw this, he tweeted out, he's like, oh my God, the rally and all this anti-Semitism. Like, what are you talking? You're a liar. And to hide behind, these terms, racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, when that actually happens to real people, to me is so despicable and shameless and just straight up evil.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Kalshi. Do you think you know who's going to win the presidential election? Maybe you know how many seats the Democrats or the Republicans are going to win in the House or the Senate. Well, there's finally a legal way to bet on the outcome of these elections, and that is the platform known as Kalshi. Kalshi is the first legal exchange where you can trade and bet on any event, including but not limited to elections. Kalshi went to court and won legal approval for election betting for the first time in over 100 years. They have markets on who will win the presidency, who's going to control the House and the Senate, who will win swing states, and more. Kalshi is already being used by hundreds of thousands of people and has facilitated close to $1 billion worth of trades. So put your money where your mouth is and give Kalshi a try. Sign up using our link at kalshi.com/Dave. And the first 500 traders who deposit $100 will get a free $20 credit. That's kalshi.com/Dave. KALSHI.com/Dave to get that $20 credit. Thanks to Kalshi for supporting the show. Let's get back into it. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I've always kind of felt this way too. Even when people, because the thing is, even when people use the term fascist, it's like what you're really invoking is the Holocaust. Like, no, to the average normie person, none of them are going like, "Oh my God, he believes in like private ownership but strong centralized control." Like, you know what I mean? Like that's.
Or he hates modern art.
Yeah, it's not none of those things. They're not talking about like your monetary or fiscal policy. You're talking about, and it's just you're actually using this horror as a political tool to score like cheap political points. I find that to be evil.
Although, now that we talk about it, it maybe it was different. Instead of everyone being rounded up and put in the camps, we were rounded up, put in our own homes. So it was kind of decentralized concentration camps. that actually ended up happening.
Yeah, well, right. And isn't it amazing? It's amazing to me how much that is not even an issue in the presidential campaign.
It's memory hold.
And part of it is because Trump can't really point to anything so I do, and I don't know if this is right or not, but as you brought up the 2022 midterm elections, and I think like particularly back then, there was something that was like very disheartening, that it's like, oh, you're telling me like all the Democrats aren't being punished in the voters' eyes for
killing old people.
Yeah, but right. And like we had already figured out this was all wrong, right? Like everyone by 2022, like there was still COVID all over the place, but no one was doing lockdowns anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Like we had figured out this didn't make sense. But then I will say the one thing that I would look to is that I did go like, oh, the Republicans really sucked on it too. And DeSantis,
not the nursing homes though. That's the one.
Well, sure, but I'm just making the point. DeSantis did take a purple state and win by 20 points.
Yeah,
and I believe Kristi Noem was reelected in South Dakota, and so it at least like gave me a little bit of like, well, maybe if the Republicans had actually been good on it, and then they could run on that, rather than also trying to memory hole it. So like there's some of that dynamic with Donald Trump too, that he just wasn't that good in 2020, or I should say he was very bad in 2020. And so he can't really run on that. But nonetheless, it's just crazy that we went through such a crazy thing. And then just a couple years later, there's a presidential election and it's not even in the top 5.
I'm shocked that the Democrats aren't, or maybe they are because I don't see any ads. I'm not in a position to see ads, but I'm shocked that they're not like 2020 riots across America, plague and people dying. This was all in a Donald Trump. Do you want to go back to that? Like for normie people, I think that would be a very strong selling point. And I don't think they're using that as a cudgel, which even though it's a lot dishonest, it still works as a technique and they're not using it. That's very odd to me. Like I think in normie terms, those riots which happened under Trump, were much more of a concern than January 6th, which they are using.
Yeah, they're using January 6th to death. And it does seem, I agree with you. I mean, it seems like the Democrats are almost kind of happy to take the deal to just memory hole COVID. They're like, all right, fine, we'll do that. Let's not bring it up at all because maybe they think that could go bad. But the January 6th stuff is there's something really bizarre, and it's a major theme in America these days where, and this changed in the last decade, where the corporate media seems to be married, like wedded to propaganda that doesn't even work. That doesn't even look for whatever I remember. I was there. Saddam Hussein's has weapons of mass destruction. However you feel about how egregious of a lie it was and what a disaster the resulting policy was, that worked on people. Like immediately after 9/11, to tell people, hey, this funny Arab-looking dictator guy has some nuclear weapons, got a whole lot of people in this country being like, well, we got to go see about that. Sorry, then I guess we got to do this,
Is that Kurt Metzger? Is that the Kurt voice?
They once you get Kurt Metzger to support a war, the war is going to happen, and he goes, I guess we got to bomb them. But whereas this January 6th stuff just doesn't seem to resonate with anybody for very good reason. And it just doesn't, and yet they just keep going to it. They keep going to the well. Joe Biden keeps bringing up Charlottesville still. Like it's very weird how divorced they are from like whether this propaganda is even effective or not.
I don't know that they have a good feedback loop anymore.
Yeah.
I think any feedback loop they would have, something like Twitter or these other resources, have been so co-opted by people who just despise, even people who are ostensibly on the left, who aren't like leftists and like Kamala Harris is going to save America and bring joy to everybody. So I think that's the issue. I think their world is getting smaller and smaller, and they're blowing smoke up each other's asses. And I think it's also like, when I was in business, I was a business major, and we learned about the Challenger explosion and how it was an example of groupthink where everyone's like looking over each other's shoulder and no one wanted to say anything, be that guy to be like, if we don't do this, like it's going to be really bad. You know what I mean? So I feel like it seems in these organizations, from what little I can see from the outside, they seem to have developed this kind of bunker mentality where they know they're clearly losing ground. Hillary's explicit about it. John Kerry's explicit about it, that we can't control the narrative anymore. And when you're in retreat, I think you're more interested in doing triage than trying to put out feelers and see what works. But it seems to be like kind of a bit of a death spiral, because I think it's very clear. And this is a big transition year. And I'm making a prediction that's not a bold one at all. It's a very obvious one in retrospect, that back in the day, it was very useful to have presidential debates because it's not sound bites. It's both 2 or sometimes 3 with Ross Perot candidates speaking at length about various issues, and you really get to know who they are and what they think, right? So you're not going to have any other opportunity for that. Now, podcasts, like, why am I in this very stilted format when you have ABC News being on the side of the Democratic candidate? Why do that when I can go? And the thing is, these podcasts, they're not adversarial, but you get to know the person at length. You've had people on, I've had people on. When we disagreed with them, we're not playing gotcha. And the audience gets to know them. It's like, okay, this is his view, this is the host's view. It's not as aggressive as, let's suppose, Meet the Press, but I think it serves a better purpose, because instead of playing gotcha, it's like, okay, let me know what this person's really going to do and what they really think, and let them speak their minds. So it's really lost its efficacy, I think. Because of the internet, you don't need to have that debate on 1 to 4 networks. And I think going forward, the Democrats are going to play catch up, and that's definitely going to be the way forward in 2024 and so on.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. And
did you see what she did to Rogan?
Oh yeah, I talked to Joe about it briefly. But yeah, that I had that info like a bit earlier than when it was out on Twitter. But that, yeah, she wanted him to travel to her. And I think they said an hour. But Brett Baer was supposed to get an hour, and then they cut it down to like 20 minutes at the last minute. So who knows what they even would have done. And I'll tell you, I was not sure until the episode came out. Remember, literally as soon as the Trump episode came out, I just looked at it on YouTube and saw he did 3 hours. And I was like, great. Because I thought maybe I knew he was coming to the studio, but I thought they also might try to do like, oh, we'll do an hour.
It's happened to me. There's a prominent congressman whose name I won't mention. His PR lady reached out to me, and she's like, hey, we'd love to have him on the show. I'm like, great. It's an hour. We record Monday or Tuesday. And she goes, okay, how about half an hour on Thursday? I didn't reply. So they still think they're in a position, and it was friendly. I don't do hostile interviews at all.
Sure, yeah.
They still don't understand who's got the audience and who's got the clout. Like it's very few of these shows, unless you're Trump, very few of these shows are excited to see someone talk to Matt Gaetz. And that's no disrespect to Matt Gaetz, but people know politicians are rehearsed and plastic, and you're not going to have that fun, engaging conversation where who knows what's going to happen with most politicians. Trump's a wild card. He's the Charlie Kelly of politics. So you're like, okay, what the fuck's this guy going to talk about next? That was part of your act. Like, all right, what next? China. Okay, let's talk about China for 20 minutes.
That's him. And it's something he's really benefited from. No, I thought it was so, and like, I had no influence in this. Like Rogan told me it had been done, but I was just so glad that he like stuck to his guns on that, because it's like, because then she didn't really do the Joe Rogan experience.
Right.
The Joe Rogan experience is going to Austin, sitting in his studio and doing 3 hours with him. And if you don't do that
chair that you and I both farted in.
Yes, that same one that I intentionally farted. I pushed it out. It didn't come out on its own.
It was a turtle.
But look, I mean, to your point, I did think that there was and of course there's benefits to kind of grilling interviews, and there's benefits to friendly conversations there. But I did think in a weird way, when the moment on the Rogan podcast when he asked him about the 2020 election, and that gets brought up every single time he's interviewed by any corporate media journalist, but that moment actually exposed him a lot more on Rogan's podcast, because they're having a friendly conversation. Joe is clearly not asking it in a bad faith way. Yeah. He's not asking it the way Dana Bash from CNN is asking the question, but he's just going, hey, so you think that, like, but why do you really believe that? And Trump really didn't have an answer. Like, he kind of just went like, believe me, there's a lot of evidence or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay. And like, so even just that little example, it can actually be like, if your goal is to get Trump, sometimes it's better off to be honest about it and like be a decent person and then expose it.
I saw a clip of an interview with Destiny, a debate between Destiny and Ben Shapiro, or discussion, whatever it was. And they were talking about the 2020. And Ben obviously has a lot of big differences from Trump, to put it mildly. And Destiny's like, Trump had all the evidence. He knows he lost. And Ben's like, you don't know that he knows that. Yeah. And if you ask me, I would say he doesn't know that, because I think I would bet a lot of money that he cannot wrap his head that he really lost to Joe Biden. Like, that's all it comes down to. And when your brain tells you something and you're at that level of narcissism and delusion and power, it's really hard to get reality to come in, because this is the person who had no political experience who's like, oh yeah, I'm just going to come down the elevator and escalator and be president. It's like, oh, okay. And he did it. So you have to have at that level, in both a positive and negative way, a bit of a screw loose to be delusional enough to think you could pull something off that you actually did.
Yeah. I was just, I was on Piers Morgan a couple days ago with Destiny and Mehdi Hassan.
Oh God.
And
I hope your beeper didn't go off.
I didn't. Evidently, it was right after that, but I hadn't seen that yet. Anyway, I mean, it was a shit show. It was ridiculous. But there was this one point that they were both of them, and it's funny because I think a lot of guys like that. They kind of like, sometimes they'll present like a long argument with certainty, but like as soon as you examine any one little individual part of it, you were like, oh, this all. So, but anyway, one of the arguments, I found this kind of fascinating, particularly from Mehdi Hassan, because he is, if you know him at all, if you know his foreign policy views, he's a big critic of Israel. Argues that genocide against the Palestinians is happening. Very anti-war, like progressive kind of worldview. But so I know he's a big critic on war. I don't know that much about him, but I know that. And
he's bad faith.
Well, unbelievably bad faith.
So once
the cameras are rolling. Once the cameras are rolling. Now, before the show, I actually had an interesting conversation with him, and he was talking about how he used to read antiwar.com back when Justin Raimondo was running the site and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And like we had an interesting conversation. But so anyway, so they're making an argument at one point, and it was about General Kelly. And he had said the stuff like Trump praised Hitler to him or something like that. And it, again, which is like, whatever. It's a couple weeks before the election, you happen to decide right now you needed to tell us in the vaguest terms without being specific about what he said. But anyway, they were arguing at one point where they were like, well, I forget the exact thing, but they were like, well, 11, generals said that Trump did this and he denies it. So who are you going to trust? Trump? And I was sitting there and I was like, well, and they asked me, I went, I don't know. I don't know who's telling the truth. I don't know.
Didn't 51 really intelligence agents tell us that Hunter left? What the fuck are you talking about?
They were almost making this argument, and he told me, Mehdi said straight up, he goes, that's insane. He goes, that's insane that you're going to trust Trump over 11 generals. And I was like, it's not a law of logic that 11 people can't lie. Like,
especially if they have a vested interest.
Yes,
wouldn't you, if Hitler's about to be elected, wouldn't you lie? Wouldn't that be the right thing to do?
Yeah, but I turned to Mehdi Hasan and I was like, are you really telling me you think it's beyond the realm of possibility that you could get a group of people together in DC?
What about Colin Powell on the floor of the UN?
Yes, well, that's why I said that was the one I brought up. I didn't bring up the 51 intelligence people because I just thought attack him from his position too.
Sure,
I just go, how'd we get in Iraq? Because a whole bunch of people in DC lied. Right?
Yeah.
So and especially one guy who's come in who has clearly pissed off all of DC. However you feel about everyone involved here, he's clearly pissed a lot of people off. But anyway, it is just like there's something to me that is it's always been an interesting thing about Donald Trump that people get so.
Didn't he praise Hitler in the sense of I need generals like Hitler had, meaning generals who are loyal to him? So that statement is true anyway.
Yeah, that seems to be like what it was, but then Trump denies it altogether. I mean, who the hell knows? But
I believe because I would have no problem with him in his stupid Trump way saying I need generals who are loyal to me like Hitler's generals are loyal to him.
Yes, and
because the military lied to him and the corporate press praised it, which is one of the most unconstitutional things in a recent American history. The whole premise of having a civilian commander-in-chief is that the military is subjugated to the will of the people. And that was thrown out the window. What was it? Syria, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, great. Yeah, we'll just lie to the president and brag about it.
And this was that was one incident where they were bragging about lying about the number of troops. But if you can recall the 4 Trump years, every other week, the New York Times was running a piece with, unnamed source in the executive branch says this, unnamed source in the Pentagon says this. And so, yes, my initial take was that if Donald Trump was praising Hitler's generals, is how they put it, it's like, I think he was probably saying it sure would be nice to have a government that was loyal to me.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? So anyway, it's not, but I just on the logic of it, you'd be like, this idea that it's impossible that multiple people were lying.
I think they're lying to the audience because it's trust the experts. And it's you said that you and I have talked about this before when you were on SE Cup show on CNN. And she's getting information from the NSA, and you're some asshole comic. And it's like, what do you expect her to believe?
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is My Patriot Supply. Let me ask you a question. Do you think our country's going in the right direction, or does it feel like everything is falling apart? If you're feeling alarmed, you're not alone. In fact, Americans from all walks of life have been taking action to prepare for whatever is coming next. And that starts with having an emergency food supply. Storing food in your home is the right thing to do because we are living in crazy times, which explains why so many people are preparing. And right now, you can get ready too with 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. It comes with delicious foods like creamy stroganoff, honey wheat bread, and mushroom rice pilaf. The entire kit offers over 2,000 calories every day. The food kit lasts up to 25 years. Who knows what our country could look like then? But when the day comes, you'll be ready. Go to preparewithsmith.com now to order your 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. Once again, that site is preparewithsmith.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah, no, I remember just feeling being like, no, I get why you're going to go with them. I get why you would you'd be like, okay, random shithead comedian or Dick Cheney's chief of staff. I'm probably going to go with that guy. So yes, I do get that dynamic.
And by the way, I'm sure those 11 generals would tell Mehdi we need to have more support of Israel. Is he going to believe them then?
Well, that's my thing. That's why I was going at him. I go, you, according to your worldview, the people you're talking about are currently conducting a genocide. Yeah. I mean, literally, like according to all reporting, Israel couldn't do what it's doing in Gaza with. I mean, they're not only just getting our weapons and money, but real time intelligence and all of that stuff. So I don't know. So they're involved in a genocide, but they're above lying. I just don't walk me through this worldview and how this all comes together. I certainly at this point am I'm very much rooting for Donald Trump to win. For all of his flaws, I do think that I think it's better for the country if Kamala Harris loses and at least a message is sent to the elite that you can't get away with this. You got to do a little bit better. Do you feel that way, or do you think it's preferable one way or the other, or do you care?
I care about Ross. I'm very scared that a lot of these MAGA people think Trump's going to come in and Santa Claus everything. Even if he's everything that they think he is, the institutional bandwidth, for lack of a better term, against him is immense. Now, the question I have, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, is I think TDS, the fever has broken. I don't think a second Trump term will be as ridiculously over the top anti-Trump, he had 2 scoops of ice cream reporting as it was in the first term. I think it'll be much more reporting on the issues. He seems to have toned it down a little. I think the rise of alternative facets of media is also going to temper their possibilities. But I got to tell you, the fact that Ryan is on CNN, Gerdusky, the fact that
I think not anymore.
They fired him?
I believe he got canned over the pager thing.
Oh, wow.
I could be wrong about that. Double check me, but I thought I saw that at least that.
The fact that Ryan could be on CNN.
Yes, he was on CNN and he was schooling people for a while there.
So I the fact that I think it was Washington Post who's looking for more conservative writers. These people have dwindling audiences, and at a certain point, hating Trump is not a personality, and I think that's happened already. The fact that I've used this example before. If it was a year ago and we were talking, I said Mark Zuckerberg is going to go on TV and praise Trump and have no pushback, it would have sounded crazy, right? And he did, and that was exactly what happened. And a lot of people are supporting Trump and they're not having their careers ruined. Whereas back in the day, even just saying he kind of sucks means you're a Trump supporter and you have to get fired and be completely read out of polite society. So I am hopeful that if he gets elected, like a Tulsi would be Secretary of State or someone like that, that RFK could get in there and be a bit of a wrecking ball. I'm glad Mitch McConnell is on his way out. If the Department of Education being on the table, these are things where I see there being a possibility. Vivek and Elon trying to cut down the federal budget. These are things that I am hopeful for. But at the same time, last time he was in, and I know there's going to be all these excuses, blah, 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 and he doesn't get them again. There's going to be excuses again. I understand. I'm just saying there were all these things that were promised. Auditing the Fed. He could have done that with a stroke of a pen. He didn't do that. So there's so many things that could be done that could have been done that weren't. So I'm curious. I'm very hopeful for a revenge tour. That he goes after these agencies who tried to kill him and take away his house and throw him in jail. That is what I'm most hopeful for. And I'm ecstatic. One of the people say the best thing about Trump is that he exposed the corporate press. No, I think the best thing about Trump is he exposed how fucked up the legal system is, and that it's not this objective, justice with a blindfold thing. That Kyle Rittenhouse, another great example, that prosecutors are often villains, that cops do fucked up things, including sitting on their hands while your neighborhood's being burnt down and then arresting you for trying to fix it. Yeah. If 10 years ago, we would have said conservatives would be receptive to this opinion, let alone have it as their opinion, we would have been laughed out of. It's like ridiculous. Like saying, oh yeah, in 10 years, the Democrats are going to be pro-life. It's like, okay, but here we are.
No, and there's no question that there's also just there's a freedom to openly support Donald Trump now that you didn't used to have. And like in 2016, if a podcaster or a comedian came out and was like, I'm pro-Trump, you'd really be kind of taking your career in your hands. Yeah. That's not the case anymore. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I got to say, I think one of the primary reasons is that, you know, was that your quote, or were you quoting someone else when you were saying the river versus the dam?
That's me.
With Trump. Yes. You were like, and how does it go exactly? They thought he was the river rather than the dam. Right. So there's something where this was kind of the argument that the corporate media, and I think a lot of progressives bought into this argument, was essentially that like everything was fine until this crazy guy got here. Yes. And now everything's all crazy because of him. And whereas I think the more correct assessment of the situation was like, no, something was building. There was this tidal wave. Trump was the one who figured out how to capitalize on it and put this wave behind him and ride it. I think the Joe Biden administration proved you correct and them wrong. I think there was something where this was Joe Biden's pitch in 2020, which you got to understand, in the year 2020, there was a compelling pitch here. Now, of course, he was just staying in his basement. He wasn't making the pitch, but he could also plausibly say, well, that's the safe thing to do. That's the responsible thing to do, is to stay in my basement. I'm not going to go be a super spreader like Donald Trump. This was the talking point, if you remember, as Trump was campaigning all the way down into the fall of 2020. And Joe Biden was like, listen, I've been here for 5,000 years. Just put me in. I'm as old. We'll go back to normal. And that he literally said back to normal. And man, did back to normal sound appealing in the year 2020. Like, yes, we don't have to be crazy like this anymore. However, then to have almost 4 years since then, and you're like, oh, the crazy didn't go away. No, Donald Trump went away, but we're still living in this new world. And I think there's something, even like for someone like me.
Wait, can I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Just one sentence. We're going to go back to normal. And now here's the they, them who's in charge of our nukes, who's stealing our suitcases. You know, back to normal.
Yeah. But then listen, it's a painful thing for people to recognize. It's a painful thing for me to recognize sometimes. And I consider myself fairly red-pilled. But that it's like, hey, just even something, bro, like, you know, the 1990s, they're never coming back. They're never coming back.
Sorry, Kennedy.
It's not happening. It's but you know, like for at least a generation, conservatives were trying to get back to the 1950s. It's like, it's a painful thing to realize that that's never actually going to happen. That's not,
like, they're trying to go back to like an imaginary 1950s, though.
Well, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But even and we all kind of are when we think about the past, because that's the way memory works. But we're never going back to a pre-Trump world. We're never going back to a pre-COVID world. We're never, like, none of that is real. We're in a new world now, and we got to map out this territory. But I do think that there's just something, whether it's even the transgender stuff, the foreign policy, the vaccine mandates, the inflation, the immigration, just everything. It's like, oh, Trump left and all the problems are still here. All of the conditions of why a Trump-like figure rose are still here. And now, as Trump's running again, they're trying to do the boogeyman thing again. But it's just like, he's a president now. He's not just Donald Trump. Yeah. He's part of the history of America. He was the commander-in-chief for 4 years, and it just doesn't seem to be effective in the way that it was even in 2016 or 2020.
Or 2022.
Right.
Yeah, because the ABC News, I tweeted this out. People probably might have seen it. They had a poll, and they had two polls like 2 weeks apart, something like that, whatever. And they had her in the lead in the national popular vote, which is certainly plausible. But the way they scored the poll, they were claiming that Kamala's voters are more enthusiastic than Trump's voters. And I'm like, I could be wrong. I've seen no evidence that's all evidence to the contrary. And everyone replying to me is like, here's the receipts there. It's completely the other way. And I have seen, other than Beyonce and Oprah, people like that, I've seen no giddiness for Kamala. There was no giddiness for Biden. There was excitement for Hillary. Some people were like, first woman president, she's a badass, she's tough, like there was excitement for her. Like I know people hate her more than anything, but no one is excited for this broad. Even again, I remind people, this is why I gave Trump like 80% chance of winning months ago. She's from California. She had Hollywood her back, and she couldn't even make Iowa. Like that is a uniquely terrible candidate. When you can't, as the senator and attorney general former of California, you can't handle the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. That's on you.
Yeah. And just for people who don't remember or weren't aware, I mean, it's not as if like she raised huge money.
Oh, yeah.
The establishment loved her. She got much of Hillary Clinton's campaign staff.
Yep.
She I think was first. I think she outraised Joe Biden in the first month that she was running. Like, and still couldn't make it to Iowa with all like the media apparatus and the big money all behind her. It was kind of like, I mean, look, even Nikki Haley made it through to whatever. I mean, she made it through 4 or 5 of the campaigns. But it was, so if you think about Nikki Haley, if you remember from this year, like the candidate who the media wanted, who the big money was all going to, and was just still getting blown out in every single primary, Harris was 10 times worse than that. Couldn't even make it through the first caucus. You know what I mean? Like she was just was a complete disaster. And so, yeah, there's something there. Not a very strong candidate.
Do you know what's even funnier? Sure. It's even funnier is that we're so trained. We as people who consume media of certain archetypes that there's 2 black women archetypes that Kamala Harris could have leaned into and really gotten some traction. One is this Oprah figure. If she's this like healing, like Earth Mother, I'm from the suburbs, I can work together, bring everyone together. That's a persona that people can wrap their head around that would have a lot of political traction. Nope. Then there's the sassy black woman who don't need no man. Like I think Stacey Abrams leads into that a little bit, right? When you have this kind of attitude, shaking your head kind of thing, where like it's kind of a joke, but that's a character that everyone knows. If she leans to that, then people like Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel have something to work with because they would pretend it's effective and like, oh my God, this badass black lady girl boss is putting the old white man in his place. Like we know that story. It's every Netflix show, and she's not leaning into that either. It's just like these are 2 layups that you're a complete phony anyway. Put in one of these hats, and you'll get somewhere more than now.
Yeah, it's I think there's a similar dynamic to what you mentioned at the top of the show about the corporate media just kind of their audience getting so small and being in their own feedback loop where they're not able to get the market information to adjust. So they're not even like kind of in the game anymore. There's something like that in the political class also, because it's been really interesting to me to watch their inability to grapple with the new dynamics and the new reality. And so even things like, okay, traditionally in politics, the way it always works, and me and you are both old enough that like we remember a time in politics when it was the traditional world where the internet was not the factor. It wasn't a factor at all at a time. And one of the things, so what you would do is, this is how politics works. You would have a stump speech. And you would give this speech everywhere you went. And they were all the advice, all the smart. And by the way, this is big money, by the way. There are people who make millions of dollars a year advising these campaigns, consultants and campaign managers. And they'd be like, it's message discipline. It's repetition. You got to like say this over and over and over again if you want everyone to get it. But now we're like in a completely different dynamic where the fact that so basically they got some market research at the very beginning of when she got in as the nominee, and they go, look, people don't really know you. Like you've been the vice president here, but people don't really know you. So she decided every single thing I do, I'm going to repeat. I was raised in a middle-class family. But now, because there's the internet, what happens is now you get all these video compilations spliced of her just saying the same thing over and over and over again. And it's like, she's got nothing to say. She can't say anything. And now it's become literally a joke. Like Saturday Night Live even was doing it, by the way, to the point of it being a little more acceptable nowadays to make fun of her. But there's just something where you're like, oh, you're not adjusting to the new reality. Meanwhile, it does seem to me like the Trump campaign is at least attempting to. They recognize that that they're like, okay, I mean, he went on with Andrew Schultz, with Patrick Bet-David, with Theo Vaughn, with Rogan, obviously. Tim. There's like just a ton of them. And
Yeah,
a bunch of others.
Yeah, JD Vance was on Tim Dillon. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's right, and you know, and there's just something to There's something where they're like, oh, okay, we get, and like, why wouldn't you? You know, like if you just look at this and you're like, oh, well, like CNN is doing like.
Well, you know why?
You know, thousands.
Because let me break this down a little bit, because this is something that I found very kind of interesting. I had Dolph Ziggler, Nick Nemeth, on my show. He's a wrestler for 20 years, WWE, and I grew up with WWF when it was called WWF. And how it worked is Vince McMahon constructed this reality where nothing outside this reality was acknowledged. So there was another organization called NWA, and all the midwits like to correct me, go, don't you mean NWO? No, in the 80s, it was called NWA. Look it up. And if a wrestler was poached from there to WWF, they weren't like, oh, he's the former world champion of NWA. They just pretended he came out of nowhere. And it worked because if you only had 4 channels and NWA was much smaller, more regional, you could get away with assuming that most people who are just only watching this Saturday afternoon aren't reading the wrestling magazines, they're going, you know, they're watching on TBS, whatever the hell it was. So they're not going to know this other guy. For corporate media, for a long time, CNN, CBS, Fox, all these things, they basically wanted to pretend podcasts and the internet don't exist, or that if these things happen on podcasts or the internet, we're going to give you the clip that matters, but you're not going over there. This is where adult conversation happens. That's more of like a playground sideshow. And as that has shifted, it's really bizarre because they still are acting like you can't change the channel. CNN's YouTube channel and your YouTube channel, like when I self-publish books on Amazon, my page is right next to Barack Obama's page. They look, if the book's done professionally, you're not going to see a difference. I can compete with them as you can or anybody else watching this can, but they still have this gatekeeper mentality, and it's really hard to keep a gate when the gate just gets shorter and shorter, and now it's like 6 inches tall, and it's like, okay, like who are you keeping out, the Smurfs? Like, and yeah, the other thing is, since their audience, the average age of these audiences for these networks is like deceased, like their audiences don't watch podcasts or, you know, go on the internet. So there's some plausibility for that, but it's really just getting more and more detached from reality.
Yeah, that's exactly right, 100%. And I got to say, one of the major reasons why I really hope Trump wins is
wait, I gotta say one more thing. I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
This just so this is why they can go on and say Joe Rogan is saying horse paste. It took horse paste. Whereas if they had any shame and intelligence, they'd be like, wait a minute, everyone's seeing this clip, can go see what Joe Rogan actually said, and he said nothing of the kind. And this is going to be hugely bad for our reputation because we're so clearly distorting what he's saying or trying to say. But they don't think like that. They're still in this WWF in the 1980s mindset. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. No, that's right. And then to even go like, oh, and our CNN doctor is going to have to go on Joe Rogan because his publisher is going to insist that he does so he can sell his book. And then he's going to have no defense when Joe Rogan calls him out for his whole network lying. Yeah, it's like there's no like foresight for any of this stuff. But this is one of the major reasons why I do hope Trump wins, is that I do think, you know, like, look, if the corporate media is down and is being beat up right now, but this is like, you know, if you hate the corporate media as much as me and you do, you're not like, all right, you got them. It's like, no, dude, hit them with a shovel now. Now that they're down, hit them with and if Donald Trump wins, the narrative is going to write itself. That he got to the presidency because he was willing to do the new media. And I do think that this is going to be like a monumental shift. This is like the corporate media is dead. The future looks bad for them, but this is going to be like the bullet to the head, man. That's just an analogy. In
Arizona right now, Ruben Gallegos is using clips from my podcast against Carrie Lake. Like, this is how low America has sunk.
It is a sad state of affairs. It's so bad. It's so bad that that's an improvement over the old system. That's how bad things are. That me and you are better at this than they are is wild. Hey folks, it's your favorite host of Part of the Problem, Dave Smith here, and let me tell you, I've started my holiday shopping early this year. Why? Because I want to give something that's not just a gift, but a memory that lasts a lifetime. I mean, who wants another fruitcake, right? I'm going to give my wife and don't tell her, she's not listening, I'm going to give her a hand-painted portrait of a photo of our entire family, because that's what they do at Paint Your Life. They turn any picture you have into a beautiful hand-painted portrait. Isn't that just the best? That's a gift that's meaningful, that someone's actually going to remember. So if you're struggling this year for like, oh, I want to give a really great gift, but you don't know what to do what I'm doing and go to Paint Your Life. You can get your holiday shopping done early this year with Paint Your Life, and you can give the most memorable, thoughtful gift you've ever given. And there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money is refunded, guaranteed. Order now to get Paint Your Life's early bird holiday offer, which is 20% off your painting. That's right. For a limited time, you can get 20% off and free shipping. To get this special offer, all you have to do is text the word problem to the number 87204. That's problem to 87204. You simply text the word problem to 87204. Paint Your Life. Celebrate the moments that matter most. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Paint Your Life. Text problem to 87204. All right, let's get back into the show. But I do think that like even just with Rogan, particularly because Rogan, I mean, the numbers are like ungodly that they're doing. It's going to be over 100 million people end up watching the thing when it's all said and done. And her insisting he come to her and her not doing it, like that narrative just writes itself, that it's like she was unwilling to do it. He cleared his schedule, went there and did it for 3 hours, and he wins and she loses.
And she expects Rogan to kiss the ring.
Yes,
it's like a Hollywood thing. Who's going to go to whose table? Like you and I are both at a restaurant. We see each other. Who's going to get up to go to the other person's table? And she still thinks she's she has something he wants more than the other way around. No, he's got the leverage.
No, I saw. It's funny because I saw some of the Kamala Harris supporters on Twitter being like, "Who does he think he is?
Yeah,
that's the presidential candidate. You're going to make demands of her." It's like, yeah. He's got the thing.
It's not demands. This is the show we do. It's not a demand. It's not like you have to come in and you're going to be attached to a lie detector. You have to come in and wear a funny hat. It's not even the Hot Wing show. It's like the only demand is you do the show like everybody else.
Yeah. That's
the only demand.
I also do think that it's, I've been saying this for a while now, but I think it's crazy that like, I was saying this before Trump did Rogan, but isn't it crazy that like, so I think I would say, like, I don't know exactly, let's just say 10 times a year, I do one of like the big long shows. So maybe I'll do Rogan a couple times a year, Tucker a couple times, Patrick Bet-David a couple times, Tim Pool a couple times, like you do like all these shows where it's going to be like, hey, this is going to be for hours. And it's going to go out to, millions of people. And it's going to be an in-depth, long show. You're going to have to talk a lot about the issues that you're, interested in. There's going to be follow-up questions. There might be some debate. There might be some disagreement. We're going to really get to know how you feel, like in depth, not just like surface level stuff. And that's like expected of me to have my career. Yet when you're running for commander in chief, and we have this ability, like we're not constrained by the old technology. It doesn't have to come on at a certain hour with commercial interruptions. Like none of that is necessary anymore. It's crazy that it almost took to this point that we would just demand that out of people who want to be political leaders.
Yeah. And it's all right. It's also going to be much more interesting questions. And this is the other thing, what's good for them. It's that there's some number that like why they do these rallies and shake hands. I think it's like 1 in 4 people, if you shake their hand, will vote for you. It's some crazy number. So people, I've seen this expression, and I think it really nails it, that podcasts are a friendship simulator, that people feel like they're hanging out with two people having conversation. It's such a great way as a politician to get people to fall in love with you and feel like they know you and feel safe with you in a position of power. I was just laughing when you were talking because it's to your point. I'm doing trigonometry this week and Winston Marshall, and then I'm doing Stossel in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited about it. I might get a fake. I might get a fake mustache. I don't know. I love him so much. He's so great. And sometimes when people on Twitter,
better, I think, over the years,
he's gotten much more of a curmudgeon. It's really kind of he didn't give a fuck before, and now he really doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah,
it's so
I know,
fun.
I love it.
It's really great. Yeah, and he's earned it. I mean, you've paid your dues, and my dues, and Lewis's dues, everybody's dues. But it's funny when people come at me on Twitter, they're like, "Oh, he's just a Twitter troll. He's never serious." It's like, I sit down several times a year for hours off the cuff, and I feel and I write books. I feel that's a much better way to get someone's point of view across than just stupidity on social media with some rando trying to play gotcha.
Oh yeah, it's so ridiculous. Well, also, like, I mean, your books are deeply serious books. I mean, like, not like, you know, like, I'm not saying you don't never like crack jokes or whatever, but like your books are incredibly serious topics. I mean, like that you do not treat glibly, like the topics that you're treating with like real sincerity and being like, no, like kind of, you know, insisting that your listener like actually grapple with the horrors of the world. And so, yeah, it's just such a weird, it's like, I don't know, like I've always found stuff like that to be like, you know, people be like, well, how are you going to like joke around like this and then be serious about that? And you're like, I don't know. Cause I'm a human being, because I don't like, I've experienced a wide range of emotions.
We see this also with like actors. People can't wrap their head around someone who's like a comedic actor. Like this was a big thing for Tom Hanks. It's like, you're a comic actor. Now you're going to be serious. Like how it's just like, what, it's impossible. Like maybe it's hard that most people have one skill. It's rare to have both, but you can't wrap your head around someone being like a douche on Twitter, but then also when their head's down, they're serious. Like they can't wrap their heads around it.
Whereas we like, wait. So let me get this straight. So you were joking and laughing with your girlfriend earlier today, but now you're having an argument with her? Like, that's crazy, dude. Who does both of those things? You're like, every human being does both of those things. Like, what do you mean? That's all part of us.
It's so weird.
What do you think, and we're coming up against the end of time here, but this is something I've been kind of thinking about lately. So I saw Donald Trump, I think it was yesterday, in some speech where he said something.
Can I say one more thing? Because people, I just thought, when people ask me, are you going to vote? You're going to vote. If you're going to vote, I'm not going to vote. And I'm telling you, if I voted, I would have written in Joe Biden.
He is, man. You would be the one. They would find the one.
But that's the thing. You'd see the results from Austin. It would say Joe Biden won. It'd be like, oh, okay, he's telling the truth.
That might make it back to Joe Biden.
It's better than for VP, right?
You got one.
Yeah.
I saw Donald Trump. He was saying, someone asked him about if he loses, like, will you accept the results of the election type generic question? And, you know, he said a very Trumpian answer. He said, he said, if it's fair, then of course I'll accept it. But if it's not fair, I won't. And then he goes, but you know, I just saw a poll the other day. It said, and I forget exactly what he said, but it said we had a 93% chance of winning. And he goes, so those are pretty good odds. I'll take 93. Now, I don't know where he's getting this from. The odds seem to be nowhere near 93% by any reasonable, you know, reading of the polls.
No, I think there was a Nate Silver that for 1 minute it was like 93 or something crazy.
No, okay. Perhaps. Nate Silver also, by the way, I think had similar odds for Hillary Clinton. My only point is that overall, that does not seem to be the odds. But regardless, in the event that on election day or a few days after that, it is announced that Kamala Harris won, where, you know, I'm kind of like, where do we go then? And I think at least the most obvious prediction to me seems to be like, well, none of Trump supporters will believe that's real, which is not necessarily the worst thing. But where do you think America goes if Kamala pulls this off?
I am very, very scared that Trump, who's no spring chicken and not exactly in the fit of best physical condition, such as myself, as a sheath underwear model, is going to die in his sleep, have a heart attack or a stroke, which is not impossible. I don't wish this on almost anybody. And no one's going to believe that it really happened. And then things are going to get really scary. That's my biggest fear. Not my biggest fear, but it's very, very up there. If Kamala wins, I would like to point something out to people. And it's really funny because when you tell people something to take one step back to go two steps forward, they can't wrap their head around it. Because I'll ask people like, okay, if Romney won in 2012, you could never have Trump. Trump would have never been president. In the same way that George W. Bush had to be such a disaster, you otherwise wouldn't have gotten a nobody like Obama elected, right? So I would say, can you understand that it's a good thing that in some regards, that Obama won in 2012, because then you got Trump, who's much more of a positive net than Romney, and even more of a net than the damage Obama did. And they can wrap their heads around that to some extent. Some people still say no, Romney still should have won. I'm like, but then you're not going to get Trump. Nope. It's like, okay, like it's just Republicans have to win, and then you have to complain that there's rhinos in Washington. Like that's your loop.
Right.
I will bring up another a woman who I think is better in pretty much every regard than Kamala Harris, which is Hillary Clinton. I think Hillary Clinton is smarter. She's certainly better on her feet, better sense of humor. She has a dark sense of humor behind the scenes, more popular. People go to jail for her. People literally refuse to testify against her, not because out of fear. You know, like, again, I'm not saying I'd rather have the flu than cancer. I'm not saying Hillary's great. I'm saying compared between those two, she's a lot better. She fucked up healthcare so bad in 94 that the Republicans got Congress for the first time in 40 years. The Speaker of the House lost his seat, and we got a balanced budget and all sorts of other things that were kind of a big positive. And Clinton went to the right of Reagan on social issues. So I don't think it's at all obvious, other than the Supreme Court, that if Kamala Harris comes in and there's a Republican Senate, which seems a certainty, we haven't had a president come in without having the Senate of his own party since, like, I think it was Ford. Like, it's really been a thing that the president comes in with his own Senate.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you mentioned it, yeah, so, Trump did, Obama did, Bush did. Yeah,
yes. So I'm sorry, the first W. Bush did not. So HW didn't have it. So you have to go back to 92, 32 years. Her proposals are DOA. I think her party is not going to rally around her because they're not really rallying around her now. They're not this enthusiastic for her like there was for Hillary or even Biden. Like, we got to get Trump out. So I think the blowback for the Republican or the anti-government side could be huge. But again, this could be just a very, very small silver lining. But I also think it's going to further divide people between. I think the cynicism is what brought down, like, the Soviet Union, when people were like, okay, this is all bullshit. Like, this woman didn't win any primaries. They shoved her in instead of Biden. Now they pulled her across the finish line. No one likes this bitch. She didn't earn it. Like, this is ridiculous. And I think an increase of that in the long term is a very healthy thing, because the more people cynical about the system, the less likely they're going to be to get us into war. Because if you're going to send your sons and daughters overseas, you have to believe the president's a good guy and this is in America's best interests and this is an ongoing current threat. But if you think the president's an asshole, it's like, fuck you. We're not doing this. Yeah. And that's a big silver lining.
No, I mean, it's true. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, we're involved in two proxy wars right now that are both pretty dangerous. But there is something where, like, the invasion of Iraq, I can't picture that happening in America anymore. And the big part of it is just because no one will believe you. No one will believe it.
But also, we have places to talk about it. There's the internet. Yeah. Before, you didn't have the internet, so you couldn't really get your voice. You sound like it's Justin Raimondo and some randos in the corner. Like, it's basically the guy in the subway screaming, like, you're crazy. But now it's systemic.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And there is something, win, lose, or whatever, there is something about, like, these alternative platforms being legitimized by the president having to come to try to get reelected by them, that it's like, yeah, those platforms aren't going anywhere, at least short of a real crackdown. Well, my friend, it has been great to talk to you about this, and we'll watch all the magic unfold in the next few days. And look, if nothing else, it's going to be quite a show.
Yes, sir. That's true. What's been your favorite part of this election season?
That is my favorite part of this election season has been talking to you about it 6 days out. I am problemed. All right. Thank you guys very much for checking it out. Make sure to go follow and support Michael Malice in all of his wonderful ventures, and we'll catch you guys next time. Peace.